I have a paying woodworking job to help my friend Jelly Helm move his studio space into a more retail setting. The space is a generic rectangle with a mezzanine in that space. And the thought is to have the studio space up above on the mezzanine and a more public space down below at the street level. And after discussing for a while, we decided what I could help with is to make some desks and benches for the public space down below and to bring the railing at the edge of the mezzanine up to code, as it wasn't quite tall enough and it was much too open. So in this film, I'm going to be focusing on the railing. First, in doing the railing, what I was thinking about was to add some infill pieces into the existing structure. And what I realized in sketching through this was that I was going to be making a whole bunch of pieces that would all have to be a little bit different and all have to fit into their respective place in the existing metal structure. And this was just going to be too much of a headache. So the thought was to do something that would attach to the face of the existing handrail. And we wanted to provide some privacy from down below, but still allow light through to the mezzanine space. So what I came up with in the end was to do some vertical pieces that would get attached to the existing railing, and then to those vertical pieces attach horizontal slats that would act like louvers in a way, so that from down below there would be a little bit of privacy when looking up towards the mezzanine, and then light could still come through those slats. Once I had a design, I could look for wood, and we have a place here called the Rebuilding Center, and they deal in reused building parts, and they have a nice selection of reclaimed Douglas fir. After picking through their selection for a while, I managed to find enough wood to do the project. So I brought it back to the shop. We really liked the idea of the reclaimed fir and that we weren't using new resources for this project. And there's something really nice about the story that the wood tells in its non-perfection, I guess you could say. And one thing that I really like about woodworking is taking a piece of something that just doesn't look like much and making it into something beautiful. Whether that's a tree stump or an old piece of reclaimed fir with a bunch of nails in it and paint. And the first thing to do is to find the nails in the wood, which I found quite a few. And Claire helped with that as well, which was a nice thing for her to do. Once I found the pieces, most things came out okay. Many of the nails were this type where the head had been broken off and I had to dig into the wood a little bit and then pull out the piece of metal. Then it was over to the radial arm saw to cut the pieces to length, mostly to cut off the ends that weren't in very good shape. And in some cases to cut out nails that were just too hard to get out. But you can see that the wood is actually really nice on the inside. Then I re-wanded the wood looking for more nails. I really didn't want to hit a nail with the planer and the joiner. Then it was over to the joiner. And it's nice to have the cupped side down so that the ends touch the planer bed and the center is up when joining. Did a face joint and an edge joint on each piece. And once that was done, I could move them over to the planer and then plane them based on the flat face that I had done. I really like this view because you can see the wood actually coming off the piece from the planer. And it's starting to look nicer and nicer. Now, I realized pretty early on that a lot of this project was about repetition, about making the same piece over and over and over again. The pieces jointed and planed, I could then rip off the final edge of each piece. And again, this was a lot of doing the same thing over and over again. I ripped the pieces all down to 3 inches wide, which is what the slats were going to be. And then my plan was to take each one of these and rip them vertically so that I would get 2 slats out of each 2x4. And I had a nice new sharp blade, so this worked pretty well. Then I cut them all to length. So for each column of slats, I could set the length up and then cut them all with one setting. But each column of slats was its own width, so I had to change that for each set of slats. Once I had everything sort of rough cut, I could start to lay out the railing. The next thing I needed to do was to notch each slat to fit into the vertical posts. And I wanted each slat to fit into a notch in the vertical post as well, and I wanted a little reveal between the slats on either side. So it was a lot of measuring and figuring and trying to figure out exactly what the shape of that little notch was going to be. Once I had that, I set up a fence and a stop block on the big bandsaw and the little bandsaw so that I could cut each side of that notch. So on the big bandsaw, I cut the longitudinal cut, and then on the little bandsaw, I cut the cross cut of that notch. It all worked great, but on the little bandsaw, I'd have this little piece that I had to pull out from behind the blade. So I ended up getting rid of the stop and just being careful about how deep I went in on the notch. And that made it go a lot quicker. Now for the vertical pieces, I was sort of short by one, so I ended up gluing a scrap piece onto a thinner piece that I had to make one of the vertical pieces, which is what I'm doing here. And with the notches cut, I could figure out the spacing for the notches on the vertical posts. So I carefully laid those out, and then once that was laid out and it looked good, I marked them. And then once I had those marks, I could then transfer that to all of the posts. And what was nice with the posts is I could do the notch with the dado blade on the radial arm saw, which made it really quick. I could just go along and cut each notch. I tried it with 2 at a time, and this worked pretty well, but I don't know there was much faster. You sort of lose some time trying to keep them aligned and making sure everything's right, but it does go twice as fast. Then I did a final face joining on all the slats, just to get them nice and smooth from the cut on the table saw. Then I could do a final layout of the railing, and everything looked pretty good. There were a few last little things that I wanted to do. One of them was to make a little bracket to hold the very top slat. As I figured people would stand at the railing and put their hands on the top slat like a railing should be. So I wanted a little bit more support for that top piece. And I needed to drill a precise hole right at the end of each slat for the screw that would hold each slat to the railing. I didn't want to glue the pieces together just because then it would be harder to take apart. And in a way it would have to be more precise, as the joints would actually have to fit together perfectly. My thinking on this joint was to allow a little bit of play on the inside face of the notch in the slat and the notch in the vertical post. This would be the place that I would hide a little bit of the inaccuracy in the measurements. And I needed to attach the post to the railing, and I looked for a U-shaped bracket and really couldn't find anything, so I ended up taking some pipe strap and bending it into the shape that I needed for that bracket. Then the final thing to do is to put finish on, and again, lots and lots and lots of repetition. But I used wipe-on polyurethane. It went on really quickly. Then it was off to the site to put everything together. I came early on a Sunday morning. It made it easier to park really close, so I didn't have to carry everything from a great distance. So the first thing I did was to put up the vertical pieces, and those had to be in just the right place. So I had to do some fitting on site, but that went just fine. And my little strap brackets worked great. So I put the screws in, and that actually worked really well. So this is what the slats look like going in. And it all went together pretty well. It took about 4 hours or so to put it all together. I was amazed that my measurements were correct. You can see on the back the little bit of space between the slat and the post, but it's hidden inside the notch in the post. So that worked out pretty well. So that's the railing. And we seem to all be pretty happy with it, so that's good. Thanks for watching.